All right. Video number 2 about the destruction of the prostitute. We are going to start at Revelation chapter 18. Up to this point, we've heard the story about the woman riding on the beast and everything that was happening. The story, verses 1 through 6, 17, 1 through 6. And then we identified some of the characters in that story, chapter 17, verses 7 through 15. So the story, character identification. And the big point, the whole point of chapter 17 is to say, here's this woman, and it looks like it's a lost cause, but guess what? God's working a plan, and the beast that she's riding on, that beast is going to use her and then throw her away and destroy her. It's going to be the beast who destroys the the prostitute. So good, good to know. God's in control. He's working a plan. I'm glad to know that. If that's your only takeaway from the book of Revelation, good. That's the main point. God is in control and he's working a plan. That's what I want to know. Okay, so let's move into our third major section, and I'm going to mark it this way. I've been doing this. I'll show you in the Bible. I've been doing this in my Bible with a purple heading here. Chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. We're going to have the actual destruction of the prostitute. All right, so let me mark that. Chapter 18 and verses 1 through 8. No, I do not want a heading, and I want a note. I'm going to put Revelation 18, 1 through 8, and the title is going to be The Destruction of the Prostitute. Boom. So let's read it together. Chapter 18 and verse 1. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory, and he called out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." Here's what I did in my Bible. I'm going to do this. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Purple. The reason why I did it purple is because I like to write my heading with my purple pen, but if there's a verse that actually says the biblical title of this heading, then see it in the text. That's the purple heading. And so this section is called Fallen, Fallen is Babylon the Great, the prostitute, the woman riding on the beast. It's over. Bye. Okay, she has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. Okay, that's it. You're destroyed. Why? Because you're nasty. Everything about you is unclean in the sight of God and detestable, and God has finally decided that it's time for you to go away. And so there you go. I think this is something worth marking in your Bible, because this is, hey, you, God's people, here's something that you should know about that. Babylon, the prostitute, she's nasty. Don't have anything to do with her. Verse 4. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues." Let's turn that yellow and also memorize it and live it and make it a part of your life. This is one of the reasons why God's people are living in the wilderness, protected from the dragon, They don't live in the city. The city this is figurative stuff. The city is Babylon and the prostitute, where every nasty thing, sinful and detestable thing lives. And so the people live in the wilderness. And the call is, get out of there, my people. If you are going to be a part of the city, if you're going to be a part of Babylon, if you're going to be a part of all that stuff and participate in her sins, then guess what? You're also going to participate in her judgment. So you better get out. Don't have anything to do with her. Come out of the world. Verse 5, her sins are heaped up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double portion for her in the cup that she mixed. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning. So as much sin and luxury that she lived in, that's as much torment and suffering as she's going to experience. In fact, double. Verse 7, as she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, and mourning I shall never see. Nothing's ever going to happen to me. I'm so powerful. I'm the controlling influence in the world right now. Wrong. Verse 8, for this purpose, her plagues will come in a single day. It's no problem for God when he decides to take care of her. Death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for mighty is the Lord God who has judged her. Okay, so Babylon is donezo. I think one of the things that I would like to do right now, because this might be its own video, so let's take some time and do it now. I don't do this very often, but I want to show you something that I've done in my Bible. And I'll type it out and write it in a way, hopefully, oh, you know what? Let me look at you when I talk about this. Here's what I'll do. If you don't want to follow this whole section, like if you don't want to hit pause and write everything down, since this is such a long note, what I'll do at the end of this video is I'll take this note that we're about to make and I'll post it in the comments section of this YouTube video so you can see it and copy it there from a place where it makes sense. And maybe I'll clean it up a little bit too, because, you know, my note's not super awesome when I write it at the time. I have other thoughts as I go. At any rate, right, here's the note. This is the point of the note. I called it Babylon's guilt. And what I mean by Babylon's guilt is, what did this prostitute, Babylon the Great, what did Babylon do that made God so mad at it? Why is God so angry at this prostitute that he's saying she's full of all of this unclean stuff and detestable things, and I'm going to destroy her and pay her back? What is her sin? Okay, so let's go through the different verses that I've marked down so that you can see it. Chapter 18 and verses 2 and 3, I think, is a really good description of what she did. Fallen, you want to read it with me? Fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place. All this stuff, she's no good. All the nations have drunk the wine, the passion of her sexual immorality. The kings of the earth have committed immorality with her. In verse 5, you've got a really nice summary. Her sins are heaped as high as heaven. That reminds me of the Tower of Babel. And God has remembered her iniquities. Okay, so what is the thing that she did that made God so mad? Number one, she killed God's people. She is guilty of the martyr's blood that she has shed. And in all of these passages, we'll just look at one so you get a sense of it. In all of these passages, you get a reminder that Babylon has been the enemy of God's people and has actively killed them. So chapter 17 and verse 6. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Okay, so in each one of these passages, you can write them down, read them yourself. In each one of these passages, this is one of the things that made God super mad at Babylon, and this is why he's about to destroy her. Number 2, the wine and the sexual immorality is mentioned over and over and over again. So chapter 18 and verse 3 is a good example of that. All the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her. So let's talk about that for 1 second. The thing that God was so mad about that he mentions over and over and over again is the wine and the sexual immorality. So the sexual immorality should be clear because we've talked about that multiple times. God describes infidelity, unfaithfulness against him. You're supposed to be, the entire world is supposed to be God's bride. He's our husband, and we, his people, are supposed to be his bride. But the problem is that most of the people in this world have gone after some other prostitute. And so maybe, like in our country, and definitely in Rome, in the time that it's written, actual sexual immorality, I'm talking about like the actual thing, the way that people dress, the way that people act, the way that they treat the sexual relationship flippantly as if it doesn't matter. Like actual sexual immorality might be what's being described here. But I don't think so. I think the sexual immorality that's being described here is cheating on God, unfaithfulness to God, worshiping other gods, doing other things. And part of that is actual sexual immorality, but that's only part of it. There's lots of ways to be unfaithful to God. And the wine, so there's 2 things that are mentioned, sexual immorality and wine. The wine, when you drink wine, it controls you. There's this controlling influence. And look, I think that's what's going on. I bet I can do this real quick. I think that's what's happening back in Ephesians chapter 5, and jump down to verse 18 right here where I'm highlighting. It says, "Do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit." Again, I don't think that this passage is talking about actually being drunk with wine. It's when you drink wine, it's called spirits. We have a place near the church building called Dogwood Wine and Spirits. Why is it called spirits? Because when you drink it, it controls you and it causes you to act stupid and do all kinds of dumb and bad stuff. And so the idea is, don't be controlled by the wine that's in you. Be controlled and driven by either the Spirit that is in you or what the Spirit puts into you, the mind of Christ. And so don't be controlled is the main point with that point. And so why, let's go back to here. Why is God so mad at Babylon over and over again? He lists these 2 things, the wine and the sexual immorality. Okay, number 3, I have called this next thing Mammon. And the reason why I called it Mammon is because of these verses in the gospel where Jesus said, nobody can serve 2 masters. And one of the masters that people try to serve in this world is their stuff, their physical stuff, their possessions. Mammon. That's what you call Mammon. And so look at chapter 18 and verse, where did I list verse 3? Verse 7 would be a really good example of this. There we go. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning. We're going to see in chapter 18, when we get to like verse 9, starting here in verse 9, and for a long ways after that, we're going to see this big concept of Babylon was so wealthy, and people who lived in Babylon were so concerned about their stuff and their luxurious living and having their things and this life that just consumed them. It was their God, and it's the thing that they committed their lives to, was having more stuff and bigger and badder stuff. And so when God comes after Babylon, one of the things that he says is, you're Mammon. That's one of the reasons. I do actually want to talk about this maybe for just a second. In chapter 18 and verse 3, this is the reason why I had verse 3 listed. It's on the next page. I don't know that you're going to want to actually make this note, but this is really important to me. One of the things that Babylon did, it says, the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. The power of her luxurious living. And I've got a little extra note to look down at verse 23 down here. In verse 23, it says, all of the nations were deceived by your sorcery. So this is where you're going to get just a little bit of Ryan commentary. What did Babylon do that made God so mad? Okay, she actively fought against God's people, killed God's people. There's the wine, the controlling influence. There's the sexual immorality, the unfaithfulness with God. You've got luxurious living. Everything is about this world and the here and now. But on that point of mammon and luxurious living, some of these passages that we just looked at describe it as the power of luxurious living and how the nations were deceived by the sorcery of this nation, this luxurious living that we're talking about right now. Look at what I wrote in my Bible to talk about this. The stuff that these people are living for have a seductive and a beguiling appeal to them. And it's almost like stuff, it's almost like the mammon, the possessions, are almost as powerful as the wine in terms of controlling people. It's like people are seduced by their stuff. It's like a cartoon where your eyes turn spiral and it's like, oh, my stuff. I need to chase after my stuff. I need to devote my life to my stuff. I've got to have all my stuff. Yeah, it's because that's your God. And it made God really mad. And so he destroyed Babylon because of it. Okay, so why is God so mad? Martyr's blood, wine, sexual immorality, mammon, and all of the associated verses. Well, at least some of the associated verses in this section. There's my little note about the power of Babylon. Take it or leave it. And then what I did, I went through all of these passages and I wrote them all down and I wrote the key words and I tried to say, how can I summarize what we're talking about? How can I just make, if I was going to make a PowerPoint on this, or how about this? If I was going to write a note in my Bible about it, how can I summarize what made God so mad at Babylon? And this is my summary. Number one, their lust for sensual pleasure. That's probably the wine and the sexual immorality and having the stuff. I don't know. The lust, every single one of these words means something to me. The lust for sensual appeals to the senses, the physical body, pleasure. The lust for sensual pleasure, wealth is included in that list. And number two, a rejection of all restraint. They just completely let themselves go and gave themselves over to these different powers. And so I think I'm going to call this video it now, just so you can watch the next one right away if you want. But let's just go ahead and call this it right now. This was the third section about the destruction of the prostitute. Fallen is Babylon the Great, the actual destruction of the prostitute. And the main thing that we covered in this video was, why was God so mad at the prostitute to destroy her? And I'll take that note and put them in the comments of the video. I think we've got one more video about the destruction of the prostitute.